Hey guys, hopefully everyone is doing well. We were with the chapter Cost Profit Volume Analysis, or CPV. It is also called CPV analysis, and we have discussed several matters in first part where these three words were important. Volume are the number of units bought or sold. Profit means how much earning, how much profit you have earned. Cost means cost of production. And we have taken an example of Lay's previously, where we have discussed if cost of Lay's was 40 per pack and you have sold that for rupees 50, with which you have got a profit of rupees 10. This was an ordinary thing we usually discuss almost in every chapter. The cost of product, when you will subtract this cost from revenue, you will get your profit. And then we have discussed few matters else as well. First was fixed cost, the cost which is not going to be changed, and then we have discussed variable cost, the cost which is not fixed. Under fixed cost, what we have discussed, if you are working for 1 day or you are working for 30 days, that cost will never be altered, that cost would not be changed. The example which we had discussed was rent of factory building. If you have paid, that rent would be fixed. You are working for 1 day or you are working for 30 days, you will have to pay rent accordingly. And variable cost, which varies according to your level of production. Example which we have discussed was electricity bill. It means if you will work for 10 days or you are the cost of electricity bill would be different as compared to the working for 30 days. Obviously, when you are working for 10 days, electricity bill will be less as compared to the working when you are doing it for 30 days. Your electricity bill would be increased. So when you are increasing your level of production, if cost is increasing, that would be called variable cost. Means due to change in level of production, if your cost is also being changed, it would be called variable cost. Then finally we have discussed new concepts of contribution margin. We have said if you have sale and you will subtract variable cost first, you will get contribution margin. Instead of profit, you will write contribution margin. And when you will subtract your fixed cost out of contribution margin, you will get net margin. So these were concepts which we have discussed earlier, and it's now time to see what new we can have: contribution margin and net margin. Further, we will be discussing the same thing, but with a different aspect would be used. And here our next means third heading, which we would be learning: contribution margin we will discuss, but per unit. And then simple contribution margin would also be discussed, and contribution contribution margin ratio we will be discussing. And next point which we will discuss would be break even point in terms of unit. And in the same way, sixth point which we will discuss would be break even point, but in terms of amount or dollars. So you may have dollars or amount. All these are new concepts, so I'm requesting you to pay attention. For this, we will hire these headings to understand everything. We have contribution margin per unit, contribution margin ratio, we have break even point, and we have already discussed total contribution margin as well. This might be the seventh heading. You can consider contribution margin as a whole. These all points would be explained with the same statement which we have written over here, we are hiding it and we'll write again so that we can have the space. It can be written over here as well, okay? Instead of writing them twice, we can use it. The very first thing is you will write per unit everything, and on other hand you will write total. Example, we can make it. Let's say you are selling 100 units. This we have decided that you are selling, total number of units are 100. Okay, and this would be discussed over here. Lays, let's say, was the example, and you have bought 100 lays to sell. As a shopkeeper, you have bought 100 packets of lays. Per packet cost and per packet sale price was also been discussed. We have written over here, one unit cost is 40 and you are selling that for rupees 50. How you will calculate the total? For this we have discussed another thing. Whenever you want to calculate per unit of any cost, what you have to do, you will take total cost and then you will divide it with number of units. In LIFO FIFO we have discussed the same formula. In cost of goods sold we have discussed the same formula. And if you want to calculate total cost, what you will have to do for this, these units are divided at right side of is equal to, and you want to take these units to the left side. It is divided over here. When we will take it to the right, to the left side, it would be multiplied. So if total cost is required to be calculated, you will multiply per unit with units. And same formula we will be using over here. If we are willing to calculate our total cost or total amount, you will multiply it with units by per unit. This way you will be able to calculate your total cost. And here actually we are be focusing to calculate our total cost. Alright, and now come over here. Per unit cost of Lays was 40 and you are selling that one pack for rupees 50. Total 100 units you have arranged. What would be the total cost of these Lays? Let's say 100 units are going to be sold. Per pack cost is 40 and uh, you will follow the formula which we have discussed over here. If you want to calculate total cost, you will multiply units with per unit. Here are your units 100 and here is your per unit. So what you will say to calculate your total cost, these are number of units, that means 100. My laptop is not working well. 100 is total number of units and you will multiply it with cost. Actually light is not available over here, and okay, 100 total number of units you are buying and per unit cost is 40. Please take a screenshot first. When I will touch is equal to, this would be vanished. Variable cost, here you have mentioned that per unit cost of Lays is 40, but you want to calculate total cost. For that you will multiply per unit with the units. Total units we have bought were 100 and per unit cost was 40. In this way total cost is 4,000 rupees. The same way you will be calculating total amount of sales. Whenever you want to calculate total, you will have to multiply units with per unit. Total unit you have sold are 100 and you are selling each unit for 50. This would be the answer of total amount of sales. Please try to understand, these are two different aspects and you must not be mixing these things. First part we have discussed is basically for per unit and second part we have discussed is for total amount. Now there will be two types of contribution margin we can calculate over here. Come here, contribution margin per unit and contribution margin in total. These two aspects we can calculate. This may be called 3A. You can understand this is 3A heading, let's say. So now let me know how much would be the contribution margin per unit and how much would be total contribution margin. Simple matter is when you will subtract per unit cost from per unit sale, you will get per unit contribution margin. And when you will subtract total variable cost from total sales, you will calculate, you will be getting total contribution margin. Here cost was 40 and you have sold for 50. It means you have a contribution margin of 10, but it would be called contribution margin per unit. This is what we are going to understand. Third heading, contribution margin per unit. How would we have calculated it? We have used everything per unit. Per unit cost was 40, per unit sale was 50. We have subtracted, then we have got per unit contribution margin. In the similar way, you have to subtract variable cost from the sale, but column has been changed. This is total cost and total amount of sales. So how much profit you will gain? Total revenue was 5,000 and you are going to subtract total cost which was 4,000. This way you have calculated your contribution margin. Please try to understand both are contribution margin, but 10 would be called contribution margin per unit and 1,000 would be called total contribution margin or contribution margin in terms of dollar. And then we can suppose any fixed cost. Let's say fixed cost is 400, which would always be available in the question. Here you would be able to calculate your final profit, which is called net margin, by subtracting what? You will subtract fixed cost from contribution margin, then you will be getting your net margin. So hopefully you have understood two new methods, contribution margin per unit and total contribution margin. If you will subtract per unit cost from per unit sale, you will get per unit contribution margin. If you will subtract total cost from total revenue, you will get total contribution margin. And our next procedure will be to understand what is break-even point. Basically, break-even point is simply a condition where your cost and your revenues are equalized, where your cost and revenue are equalized. For example, let's say you have your cost 100 rupees and your revenues are also 100 rupees. You are not getting any profit. The cost of product was 100 and you have sold that product for rupees 100. It means no profit you have gained. The situation where neither you are getting profit nor you are facing loss, that condition is called break-even point. Please repeat it, revise it and say it again and again. If you are not earning any profit like this, you can understand that. We can change this example over here. If you were selling a product for rupees 4,000 while its cost was also 4,000, how much profit after selling you will get? Nothing. So it would be 0. This 0 will show that we are on break-even point. Theoretically, we have discussed that a break-even point is a point where you are not getting any profit. Your cost is absolutely equal to your sale price. So when your cost and sale is equal, that would be called your break-even point. Cost includes two types of cost which we have already discussed, fixed cost and variable cost. When you will add fixed and variable cost, you will get your total cost. Okay, this might be written over here. If you want to calculate your total cost, you will have to add two main cost, fixed cost, and then you will add in this fixed cost your variable cost, you will get total cost. And suppose this cost is exactly equal to your revenue, it would be called your break-even point. Right now we will be discussing it theoretically, and now we are going to see its formula. Next, you will see how to calculate your break-even point, but according to units or per unit. You may write it in this way or you may write just unit. So for this you need to have fixed cost, and then you will divide it per unit CM or contribution margin. I should have written it full, contribution margin per unit. Now please repeat it. Break even point you want to calculate, and this break even is per unit. So you will be calculating by dividing fixed cost with per unit contribution margin. So this way you will be able to calculate your break even per unit. And we are going to calculate over here your fixed cost over here was 400. This was just an example and we are taking the same example. And you are going to divide it with per unit contribution margin. Here you have seen in this line there were two contribution margin, 10 and 1000. 10 was calculated through per unit. So this would be your per unit contribution margin, and if you will divide your per unit contribution, if you will divide your fixed cost by per unit contribution margin, you will get break even point per unit. So how much that break even point would be? For this 400 is being divided by 10, 40 would be considered your break even point per unit. So fifth heading we have discussed, and now we are going to discuss break even point in terms of dollar. This is our final heading which we will be putting over here. So break even point is again being discussed, but this would be not per unit, rather in terms of dollar or amount. Okay, so again you would be having your fixed cost over here, and it would be divided by contribution margin ratio. Formula we have written, but still contribution margin ratio is missing, and we'll have to see how to calculate contribution margin ratio. For that purpose you need again two elements. You have calculated sales over here. Total amount of sale was 5000, and you have calculated your contribution margin which is 1000. These two factors would be needed to calculate your contribution margin ratio. For that we will be writing its formula first. Contribution one second please. Contribution margin ratio will be calculated by dividing again contribution please excuse me for this delay because due to lack of vision it is happening. Anyhow, contribution margin, and you will divide it by sales. This way you will be able to calculate your contribution margin. Let's calculate it. Your contribution margin was 1000, as you can see over here. Total contribution margin was 1000. You will write it 1000 first, and then you will divide it with sale. Amount of sale was 5,000, you can see over here. After dividing 1000 by 5000, you will get contribution margin ratio. So upon calculator, you will write 1000, it would be divided by 5000. One extra zero has been put. Let's raise it. So point 2 would be your contribution margin ratio. So these concepts are very important. I'm just requesting you to please concentrate upon it. Here we have already discussed break-even point per unit, and we were discussing break-even point but with aspect of total amount. This was our heading which we were discussing. For that we were in need to have fixed cost, and it was going to be divided by contribution margin. And since contribution margin was not discussed earlier, we have made its formula as well. Contribution margin per unit, how would we calculate it? For that you need contribution margin total, and you will divide it with sales. So this point 2 would be considered as your contribution margin ratio. So you will go back and will write the amounts for above formula. Fixed cost was available over here, that was 400. So you will write 400, and it would be divided by contribution margin ratio. The ratio of contribution margin here we have calculated, that was 0.2. So this way you will be able to calculate your break-even point in terms of amount. Upon calculator you will write 400 first, and then you will be dividing it by 0.2. So in this way, this 2000 will be showing you break-even point in terms of amount, and this contribution margin ratio, it is showing what? In terms of your two major aspects are associated with it, that is contribution margin divided by sales. So all points we have discussed over here, and you are in need to revise it them by yourself. But here, whenever I will ask you about fixed cost, you must have a very comprehensive answer. When I will ask about variable cost, you must have its answer. Contribution margin per unit you have calculated by subtracting per unit variable cost from per unit variable cost from per unit sale. This would be considered as per unit contribution margin. And then you have discussed contribution margin ratios, and the formula for contribution margin ratio is written over here. Per unit contribution margin is 10. Contribution margin ratio was the fourth point, and here is fourth points formula. And then we have discussed break even point per unit. This was fifth formula. So we are going to write 5 over here, and then we have discussed break even point in terms of dollar, the sixth formula, and this is your sixth formula. I am very humbly requesting to learn and to memorize all of these formulas. Total 6 items we have discussed over here. Started from fixed cost, variable cost, contribution margin per unit, contribution margin ratio, break even point, and break even point in terms of amount. All formulas are written over here. Note them clearly, memorize them clearly, and when we are meeting, we will surely be discussing in class, and we will be surely you people will be asked to present all of these 6 formulas. And this is all about introduction of our chapter. I'm very hopeful that you people will be cooperative and you people will be learning well. If you have any query, if you have any question about any formula written over here, you may ask me again and again. I'm surely be answering them. So for the time being, we are taking break again. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we will be meeting soon again for the solution of practical problems. Up till then, please take care of yourself, and I'm asking or requesting you to pray for me as well. So it's time to say goodbye. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.